Welcome to another edition of Yorkton Stories, our look at Yorkton and area people and events, past and present. My name is Dick DeReich. We appreciate the support of our premier sponsors, Harvest Meats and Grain Millers, both here in Yorkton, and others who assist us in many ways. Our podcasts are available on our website, yorktonstories.ca, where you will also find photos, links, and other information associated with each podcast when available. You can not only hear the stories, you can also see and read information about the podcast topics. We can also be found on all major podcast directories, including Spotify, YouTube Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, TuneIn and Alexa, and iHeartRadio. Search for Yorkton Stories and you'll find us. You could say we are turning the tables on Dan Calef by telling his story. After all, he was Dan the Storyman, known locally as the storytelling head of the Yorkton Public Library from 1983 to 1999, who looked after story time for kids and told stories on local, then national, then also American television. Here in Yorkton, he was also regularly seen to be running on the streets of the city, easily recognizable by his longish beard and his steady gait. Dan wasn't just jogging. Less well known than the storytelling and the local running was the fact he took part in marathons in Canada and the United States, as well as what is known as ultra running. We sat down with Dan and asked him to tell us the story of Dan the Storyman. But obviously, his story would not be complete without also talking about the television show in which he appeared for 5 years, a local production called Poetry and Friends. Dan Calef was born in Chicago 76 years ago. His father was a professor at the University of Chicago, and he furthered his own education in Wisconsin. He and his spouse Susan came to Canada in 1974 because of better employment opportunities in the public library field, and he worked in Regina, Milford, the Yukon, then back in the U.S. for 2 years, then Moose Jaw and Yorkton, where the family, 2 daughters and a son included, settled in for a 16-year career as the chief librarian. He worked back in the United States for some years in the early 2000s, but when it came time to retire, it was in Yorkton. Poetry and Friends is an indelible part of Dan Calef's career. So we delved into that television program with Dan and others, including Greg Popovich, who spent 18 years at CICC-TV, the CTV affiliate in Yorkton, and who was the producer of the show. We also received permission from Kevin Power, a podcaster who hosts Saskescapes, which looks at arts and culture in Saskatchewan. The clips from his podcast primarily feature the 2 women who did the writing for the show and were also the puppeteers, Debbie Hayward and Joyce Bagley. When you hear their voices, it's thanks to Kevin Power and the Saskescapes podcast. There is confusing and sometimes conflicting information from various sources about the actual dates of the show. But back in January of 1995, when the show was still in its prime, Calvin Daniels wrote an extensive story in Yorkton This Week and Enterprise about Poetry and Friends. At the time, it went on national television. You can read that story on our website. The show premiered in late October of 1990, Calvin writes, and 28 half-hour episodes were produced over a 2-year span. During that time, it won 2, or was it 3, CanPro Awards for Best Children's Programming, awarded by the Canadian Television Program Festival, which was held from 1974 to 1999. Production then stopped for about 2 seasons before the cable channel YTV, which featured children's programming, decided they wanted to broadcast it nationally, impressed, one would guess, by the awards that Poetry and Friends had won. But YTV wanted at least 39 episodes, so back they all went into the studio and continued to produce 3 more years of the shows, a total of 65 by the time it ended in 1997. Several sources have shown the dates as 1995 to 2000, but those were likely the years it was on national cable. When YTV picked it up, it was also shown on Nickelodeon, a channel for young people in the United States. Greg Popovich left the television business, and with his wife Elizabeth, who was on air at the Yorkton television station, moved to Regina. There she worked as the spokesperson for the Regina Police Department. She is now retired. Greg decided to make a career change, went back to school, and became an architectural technologist, work that he still does. Greg Popovich explains how it all started.
I approached management actually with an idea to do a sports show. And they said, no, you know what? We don't need another sports show, but how about doing a children's program? And that hadn't even really occurred to me. But our son had been born in 1990, and Nicholas has Down syndrome. So at the time, we were working with a lot of early childhood interventionists, I guess, and learning a lot about how children learn and how they progress. So I sort of decided, hey, why don't I use some of that and incorporate that into a children's show? I understood we could never be a Sesame Street or something like that, but if we focused purely on what kids enjoyed, and plenty of adults have said, oh, I don't, it's not as good as Sesame Street because I just don't find it as funny or whatever. But we really focused on what the kids were learning at a particular age or whatever, and really tried to make it specifically for them. That's how it started. And then I was really lucky to be surrounded by people who really got on board. Debbie Hayward, who played Birdie, and Joyce Bagley, who wrote all the poetry, like original poetry for the show, and came up with story ideas. And there were other characters that they also played in the program. So it was really, it really wasn't one person. It was sort of a coming together of many masterminds.
Joyce and I were blessed to be able to work together at CTV. So our desks were side by side, and so we knew each other from there, but also we knew each other through the writing group here in town. And we were very lucky to not only be co-workers, but good friends as well.
Debbie and I were both continuity writers at the TV station.
It sounded like a great fun, something different for us to work on besides our regular work. And so we both said yes, and the rest is history, I think, isn't it, Joyce?
Yes, that's exactly how it happened. They needed writers for the show. It's one thing to have the idea, but then you have to write it.
It was definitely a shoestring budget. So we ran on creativity, not money, I think. It was kind of a challenge, and everyone accepted it, and it was a lot of fun. That was sort of still in the days when TV was fun to do. Maybe it still is. I haven't done it for 30 years. Yeah, you could go a long way on creativity. The book publishers provided books, and lots of people provided talent and work well below what would have been a going rate. But people believed in the program. It was a real team effort, and that paid off.
Debbie Hayward, Joyce Bagley, and Dan talk about the characters on their show and who was who.
We made the tree, 10-foot tree made out of paper mache with a moving face. The face was a rubber type of thing. I was not on camera, but I was inside that tree moving the eyes. The show was being produced. That was me moving the eyes.
But that was not your voice.
No, it was Jim Brock.
There were 3 of us actually in the tree, weren't there? You ran the eyes, and
yes,
it must have been crowded
in there. You had to be in there to work Birdie.
That's right.
You must have been quite packed in that thing.
Oh, yes, it was surprisingly roomy.
Yeah.
As far as trees go.
Small. Jim wasn't small.
Dan, you were lucky because you got to sit on a limb of the tree away from all that madness.
Oh, yeah, I was, it was nice out there. Nice breeze all the time.
Dan was still in the madness, though, even though he was in the treehouse.
Debbie, with more about her character, Birdie.
They were sort of looking for a person to play Birdie, and I don't know whether I said something in a voice that I thought was the way Birdie would speak, and I sort of had a little audition. But anyway, once we did that, it just fell into place that I would be Birdie, so that just was the way it was for the rest of the show.
Now, did Birdie physically exist at that time?
No, he didn't. So he was.
Who decided that it was going to be a bird, and who made Birdie?
Greg's idea originally was to have a bird live in poetry, in poetry's branches, but I was the one who made Birdie, and he's a very cheerful-looking little fellow.
And about the couch potatoes and other characters.
We had such fun doing them because they were the final result of whatever adventure they were on was always to eat chips.
Yes, I know.
So there was, Joyce and I were two of the constant potatoes, and then the third voice was, sometimes it was Greg, but sometimes it was whoever just happened to be free. But Joyce and I always operated the potatoes, didn't we, Joyce?
Yes, we always did the potatoes. And we always wrote the scripts. We would just go off somewhere and just throw lines back and forth until we got the script. Didn't take us long.
Joyce, do you remember when we wrote the poem for the couch potatoes?
Oh, I loved that poem, yes.
It probably took us, it just seemed the words just came. It was like magical. Mm-hmm. All of a sudden, there it was.
Don't want to move, don't want to fuss. Be a couch potato with us. Relax all day, sleep all night. Eating snacks, hey, that's all right. Donuts, bars, pretzels, chips. We don't care if it goes to our hips. Shakes and burgers, cones and fries. All these goodies tantalize. Don't want to move, don't want to fuss. So bring some more snacks for us.
Besides the couch potatoes and the boggly bananas, we had a lot of characters. We had peas that came to visit once in a while, like peas in a pod. And we had Dreyfus the dragon and Ned, who was a neighbor, and the feathered frenzies. Do you remember them, Joyce?
Oh, yes, those were good.
Tell me about the frenzies?
The frenzies. And they were frantic frenzies. They were very excitable birds that Birdie knew. There were 4 of them.
I asked Greg Popovich if Poetry and Friends might be a highlight of his career in Yorkton television, and how the half-hour episodes were recorded and put together.
Yeah, I would. I think I would. It was probably one of the most creative things that I did, or that that I got to work on. Well, basically, we had full autonomy, really. We kind of did what we wanted as long as we delivered the programs on time and good quality. So it was a lot of fun. The way the show was put together, it was made up of all kinds of different segments that would have been shot. For example, there was a kids' craft segment where and the idea there was that I remember being a kid myself and watching Mr. Dress Up and other shows where they would make a craft and it would be this fantastic, it'd come out, this fantastic craft at the end. So what we decided to do was just get some regular kids and do a regular craft, and they never worked out in the end, but the kids were happy. It was like what a kid would do, right? And that's what it looked like. We'd shoot a bunch of those, and then a week later or 2 weeks later, we'd shoot a different segment where we had some movement to music stuff. We had different puppet characters that did segments. we could potentially be shooting parts of all the episodes at any given time. The actual Dan the Storyman and Poetry, that would usually take just a couple of hours per episode, but he would probably be on, out of that 30 minutes, he'd be on for maybe closer to 10. It would vary.
You won some awards and ended up being on national television, both in Canada and the United States.
We, at the time, were owned by, I think at the time it was Bayton Broadcasting. So we were actually owned by a larger television company. And I really wasn't involved very much. Their Toronto office must have shopped it around to other broadcasters. It wasn't directly sold from Yorkton to YTV or down into the States. It would have gone through head office, I guess, in Toronto. I knew that it would run in Saskatchewan because the company that owned us owned CTV stations in Yorkton, Regina, Saskatoon, Prince Albert, and we knew that the program would run there. As far as going anywhere else, it never even occurred to me that it would go beyond local, which it did.
Yes, it did, as Dan recalls.
This bookseller that used to come up to Yorkton, when I moved back to Minnesota at one point, and he came to visit me there. So, we were good friends. Anyway, he was up north camping with some of his buddies way up in north in Minnesota. And he got up Saturday, and there the show comes on the TV. Dave said, "Oh, I know that guy. That's Dan the Storyman. He's from Yorkton. I knew him up there." And then they said, "Oh, come on, Dave. You're still hungover from last night." He said, "No, I really knew him." And anyway, so yeah, it just goes to show that eventually the show went all over the States, and it was surprisingly well received down there, too.
Greg talks about Dan's involvement in the program and his contributions.
We obviously wanted to have a strong story component to the program, and we wanted to use books published in Saskatchewan. We may have started talking to Dan about that, and sort of one thing led to another, and it was sort of like, wow, this guy is like the perfect guy, the perfect character to play Storyman, because really he was Dan the Storyman before there was ever a Poetry. So he took that character and brought it to the program, and yeah, it worked out great. It was fantastic.
He was a very recognizable character.
Yeah, he really was the character. It's not like we changed his appearance. He was the perfect Dan the Storyman. That was him.
Poetry and Friends definitely defined Dan as the Storyman. He comments on that, and then we talk about books and libraries and the impact of the internet.
When I came to the library, I was the head librarian, but I also was the storyteller. To me, that was almost more important than actually being the boss. I guess that was my nickname or whatever for story time. But when it really got going was when Poetry and Friends took off, because that was sort of the rhyme. Milk and Dan, he was our local story man. So that it was, Dan the Storyman, of course. And so, really all over town, people, they probably don't even know my last name, but they know it's Dan the Storyman. And it always amazes me that, this was a little local show. It was quite good given the resources, but how many people watched it? Still, like when I go swimming, I've been swimming for about the last 8 years. And, about a year ago, some youngish, probably 30-ish lady came up and just about gave me this big hug and said, "Are you Dan the Storyman?" And I said, "Yes, I am." And she said, "Oh, I used to watch your show," and she got all excited. Anyway, it's just amazing how many people, still remember that. And so it's kind of nice. I guess I started when we lived in Melfort and, found out that's really what I like to do and was good at. So it's been everywhere I've worked, really.
Do you read from books or do you tell your own stories?
Some of both. Like generally with the little kids, they like to have the book because then they can actually see pictures and stuff. But it's a mix of both.
Is storytelling becoming a lost art with everything being available online? And
I don't think so, because I haven't actually been to story time at the library here since I retired, but I think they still get really good crowds, and I think the parents that bring them realize that, what a good thing it is that they're, well, for one thing, coming to the library, but also, teaches them to listen and that sort of thing. So I don't know. I don't think it's a lost thing.
As increasingly everything is online, people are, kind of tied to their phones and their laptops. And does that worry you as somebody who's been involved with books and reading all your life? Is there a concern there that as to where this might all end up?
Like, I don't do it. I don't read online, but I just think it's a different form. I don't think, people still read on their laptop or their phone or whatever. I don't think people are reading less necessarily.
Poetry and Friends. How did you get involved in it?
Well, it's really funny because as part of my job, I used to go to the TV station sort of once a week to talk about the library and any special events we were having. And one day I was over there and, doing my little 5-minute thing, and I think Greg Popowich was the person that actually put the show initially together. He said, "Oh, we're thinking of starting a kids show on the TV. Do you know anybody who'd like to get involved or something?" I said, "How about me?" And then so he said, "Okay." And then I didn't hear anything for about 6 months, so I sort of thought they'd forgotten about it. And then he called and said, "Okay, here's the idea. We're going to have a talking tree, and we'll go from there." And so that's how it got started, which turned out to be a good thing for me, but also for the library and everything. So it worked out really well. Yeah. Yeah. Well, the idea, like I said, we knew there was going to be this tree, and I was going to be sitting in the tree, there'd be stories. So that sort of was the basic idea. Later on, they added, like, they had a little exercise thing at some point in the show, and they had a craft thing. So those two things were added later. Birdie was the star of the show. Like, that's what seems kind of unfair, because I was the only human actually on stage or on screen, and so people recognize me still, 30 years later, whereas nobody knows Birdie because it was her voice. But Debbie walks down the street, most people don't know that she was Birdie. So really, she was the star of the show.
Yeah, and then she was very involved with the film festival, and right now still is very involved with the Horticultural Society as well. Probably more people know her from that than they would from the Poetry and Friends. And Joyce Bagley was the other one who was inside the tree, as I understand it.
She was operating the eyes, but she actually wrote most of the episodes. Yeah, she's very responsible for the content. Yeah, and again, nobody knows that unless they're familiar with the show. Yeah.
Jim Brock was the voice, I think, of the tree for a while.
Initially, yeah, right.
And then Judd Niven.
Right, yeah.
And Judd's in Calgary, became a member of the police force.
That's right.
Did it affect the library at all? Would that have had any kind of positive impact on library attendance?
It's hard to say, but probably, because, again, maybe if people that weren't necessarily story time or library users, they saw me on the show and they figured out, oh yeah, he works at the Yorkton Public Library, maybe we should go to story time. So I can't say that actually happened, but it might have. Let's face it, more people watch TV, so if anything is on TV, it gets more exposure.
And we talked about the other pastime that has been a large part of his life, running.
Been doing it forever. Well, I initially started as a swimmer, when I was about 7, and swam competitively, quite seriously, until high school. And then I still off and on swam in high school. Just as I was starting high school in Chicago, we lived right near Stag Field, where the famous atomic stuff was going on. But anyway, that's where the running track was. So I used to go over there, run a bit. And one summer, there was these 2 race walkers there. And for some reason, this caught my eye. And I thought, gee, I'd like to try that. So I did. And did extremely well. So I did that quite seriously through high school and still swam a little bit.
Race walking is you have to
You have 1 foot on the ground.
1 foot on the ground all the time, right?
Which doesn't always happen, but
Yeah.
theoretically,
Yeah.
So, so that's how I sort of got going on that. And then, anyway, when I went off to university and being a professor's son, I had to do well. So I wasn't going to waste any time on race walking anymore. So I didn't. And I eventually tried to get going again, but never really very successfully. But anyway, then I started running just because I had to do something. And so I started running, seriously, probably when I was, 20 or so. And, was reasonably successful at that. And so I've been doing that basically all my life and did it until probably 5 or 6 years ago when I never did much stretching and stuff. So I found I was getting more brittle all the time. And so then finally I started swimming regularly about 7 years ago. But then the pandemic came, so they closed the pool for a year. And so then I had to start running again. So I still do it off and on, but I prefer to be swimming now. And the longer the race, the better for me. Like I never had much speed, but yeah, I eventually did ultra marathons, and that's what I was most successful at. Well, anything longer than a marathon.
Yeah.
But I won the one race that I ran most was called the Edmund Fitzgerald, which was started out in the middle of nowhere in northern Minnesota, ended up in Duluth, and that was a 100K race.
100K.
Yeah. I think I ran that 10 times. But I also did a couple of 24-hour runs, which basically just see how far you can go in 24 hours.
And how far can you go in 24 hours?
Three of my attempts I didn't finish.
How do you prepare your body, your mind for running, whether it's 24 hours or 100K or 100 miles or a marathon? How do you prepare for that?
Well, yeah, I mean, I'm pretty well run my whole adult life. So it's just something that I've always enjoyed doing. And I quickly discovered early on in my career that I never had any speed. So it seemed like the longer races were, the better I did. Like I have a friend, Albert Orban, who lives in Nipawin. Like whenever we would race, we were pretty even. Like he would always beat me at 10K. 20K, it was sometimes I would beat him, sometimes he would beat me. And then further than 20K, I would almost always beat him in the marathon and further if we ever ran further than that. So that was, I quickly caught on, well, this is what I'm good at. I'm not going to beat anybody in a 10K. So I remember, like I'd run marathons, quite a few, but I'd often thought about doing an ultra marathon further than 26 miles. And when we were living in Moose Jaw, one summer day in July, I think, I ran for 4 hours. And I thought, okay, if I can do that. It was a really hot day, too. I said, I'm ready. Another friend took me out to Alberta. I think it was to Vermilion. I forget what the race was called, but it was a 50-mile race. And I did quite well there. And it was kind of a strange race because it started at midnight and ran for whatever reason. I can't remember what place I got, but I did quite well. So then I thought, well, there are longer races than this. Maybe we should try that. So I think possibly the next longest race I did was the Edmund Fitzgerald. And the last 25 miles is right along Lake Superior. So it's a beautiful race. Not that you're feeling very good when you get to those last 25 miles. But anyway, so eventually I ran that 10 times, I think, and did quite well there. And then I thought, well, there are 24-hour races. Maybe I could try that. So I think I actually ran 4 of those. I know one was in Victoria where it rained after about 16 hours and I got really cold and I quit. So I didn't finish that one. I think I ran 85 miles. And then there was one in Seattle, I think, where again I didn't finish. I felt the same 85 miles. And then there was one in Wisconsin where it was really hot and I told myself, now be careful when it's so hot. Wait till it gets dark, and then you'll feel better. But of course, I didn't listen, so I didn't finish that one either. But finally, I went to this one down in California. It was 3 races at once. It was 24 hours, 48 hours, or 6 days. Well, I wasn't going to try the 6-day one. And I just told myself, no matter what, you have to finish this time. And so I was very careful at the beginning, and the weather was good. And anyway, eventually, I think I finished 4th in the whole race, not just the old guys category, and ran 125 miles. So that was far and away my best effort. Soon thereafter, I got nominated to compete for Canada at the World 100-kilometer Championship, which was in Belgium, I think. And we had 3 kids at university, so I said, well, I can't go, we can't afford it. And of course, I could have just asked for donations from everybody in Yorkton. I should have. I don't know why I didn't, but anyway, and no doubt I would have finished last because he would be running against 2:15 marathoners as opposed to me, a 2:50 marathoner. But it would have been pretty neat to put on the maple leaf once at least.
When you get ready for a race, is there things about diet or hydration or warm-ups? Do you do anything special?
Not really, especially in a longer race. I probably should have paid a little more attention because I used to drink a lot of beer. I still do, and so that's not the best post-race liquid for you. Is that you get more dehydrated, of course. But so that was probably not such a good idea. But otherwise, no, I've never had much of a special diet. I just eat whatever I want. But there are people who swear by certain things.
Mentally, is that tough getting prepared for that?
Yeah, I mean, that's especially in a race was longer than a marathon. You realize this is not going to be easy. For me, one of the most important lessons to learn was you're really not racing against other people. You basically need to listen to your body and what it's telling you. I'm going too fast. Let's slow down for the first 5 or 6 hours. Be careful. In Victoria, I think there was a famous ultra runner there. So after about 16, 18 hours, I was only a few laps behind him, and I thought, okay, this could be really good. So I tried to basically stick with him, and that was a mistake because I just wasn't ready at that point to push ahead so hard, and then I dropped out eventually. It's really more listening to yourself, what your body's telling you, and just be careful and make sure you're going to be around at the end.
Well, I remember you, and many people will, watching you run in Yorkton here. I think your beard was a little longer maybe at the time, and maybe not quite as gray.
That's how most people know me, because there's this crazy guy out when it's 30 below, and there he is, still out there, which I was. I mean, if you're going to be serious, let alone weather stopped you, especially where we live. So, yeah, so most people probably know me as a runner rather than a librarian.
If you do an online search for Dan Calef running, the top results will be a link to Ultra Running Magazine and Dan's race results. There you will see that in 1984, he ran a 50-mile race in just over 6 hours and 29 minutes. In 1995, he ran a race that consists of 24 hours of nonstop running. He covered just under 125 miles in that time and finished 3rd. Then in 2002, the Edmund Fitzgerald, a 100-kilometer race in Minnesota, he ran the 100 kilometers in 10 hours, 35 minutes, and 9 seconds. He finished 15th out of 35 in the men's division and 2nd in his age category, ages 50 to 59. He was less than 4 minutes behind the low time for those ages and 11 minutes ahead of the next runner. You still do some storytelling occasionally in your retirement?
I didn't for quite a while. Like when I first retired, I used to do birthday parties and stuff and maybe charge $20 or something. And I haven't done that for a long time. But just recently, the Paws and Claws rescue people, we go over there just about every weekend to visit the cats. So they said, well, we're going to move into our new building here pretty quick. Would you be interested in doing stories once in a while to see if we can attract some more kids? And so I think I've done that 3 times now, and it's actually been a lot of fun. It was a little crazy last week because I had been with the puppies, and they were roaming around, and I'm trying to tell stories, and they're barking, and the kids are more interested in the puppies than me. So that didn't work too well, but the one with cats was better. So they're a little better behaved.
So if a club or organization has a special event?
Oh, sure. Yeah. I mean, I don't know how many, maybe the parents will still remember me, so the kids certainly won't. But yeah, no, that's fine. I'm happy to do it. Yeah.
Watch for and listen to another podcast in the next month. Visit yorktonstories.ca to hear this and all previous podcasts. And there you can also sign up to our email list so we can let you know when a new episode is available. You can support us with a small dollar donation if you wish to help defer the cost of the technology and the research that makes these podcasts possible. Thanks again to Harvest Meats and Grain Millers for their support, and thank you for listening. Your comments and suggestions are always welcome. Get in touch through our website or by emailing Dick, D-I-C-K, at yorktonstories.ca. Join us again for more Yorkton Stories.